Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, May 4th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, we are expecting a high of 64.4 degrees with a low reaching 55.3 degrees. Since it is May the 4th, we hope everyone is having a wonderful Star Wars day. Coming up, we are taking a look at the United States strategy to assist vessels currently stuck in the Persian Gulf. We will also examine why officials in New Mexico are pushing for a major overhaul of Meta and its social media platforms. Beyond those main headlines, we will have a roundup of other significant updates from around the globe. There is a lot to get through today, so stick with us for all this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. We're starting today with a major U.S. military operation that just launched in the Persian Gulf, aimed at rescuing thousands of stranded ships and the crews trapped on board. For more on this, we're joined by our reporter Ethan. Ethan, what exactly kicked off today?
Good morning, Grace. The Trump administration officially launched something it's calling Project Freedom, also referred to as Operation Freedom. The goal is to extract roughly 2,000 commercial vessels and about 20,000 seafarers stuck inside the Persian Gulf. President Trump announced it on social media last night, framing it as a humanitarian gesture for, in his words, neutral and innocent countries whose commerce has been paralyzed by the ongoing war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
That's a staggering number of ships and people. How big is the U.S. footprint here?
It's enormous, Grace. According to PBS NewsHour and the BBC, U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, is running the operation, and they've assigned roughly 15,000 American service members to it. There are several guided missile destroyers in the mix, plus more than 100 land and sea-based aircraft. So this is one of the larger maritime undertakings the U.S. Navy has run in this region in years.
And practically speaking, how do you move 2,000 ships out of a war zone?
That's the fascinating part. Rather than escorting each ship hull to hull, the BBC and CENTCOM say the Navy is providing what they're calling intelligence guidance and area security. That means sharing surveyed, mine-free routes and keeping a heavy presence in the vicinity to deter Iranian attacks. The Joint Maritime Information Center, known as the JMIC, has set up what they're calling an enhanced security area that reroutes traffic through Omani territorial waters to bypass Iranian-mined sectors.
Let's back up for our listeners. How did so many ships end up trapped in the first place?
The Associated Press, reporting through the Columbian, calls it a dual blockade, and that's a really useful way to think about it. Since the war began on February 28th, just over 2 months ago, Iran has essentially closed the Strait of Hormuz, deploying naval mines and small attack craft. But on top of that, the U.S. Treasury Department, led by Secretary Scott Bessent, has enforced what they're calling a legal blockade through an initiative named Economic Fury. So ships are pinned down by both physical and financial barriers at once.
Walk us through that legal blockade. How does it actually trap a commercial vessel?
Iran has been demanding what it calls transit tolls for safe passage. But under U.S. sanctions, any shipping company or insurer that pays those tolls faces punitive secondary sanctions, and that would cut them off from the U.S. financial system entirely. So even captains who could physically run the gauntlet can't legally pay their way out. That's why ships have just remained at anchor, sometimes for weeks, with nowhere to go.
And what's the human cost of that standoff right now?
It's grim, Grace. PBS NewsHour highlights that the 20,000 seafarers stranded out there, many of them from India and Southeast Asia, are running low on food and drinking water. They're sitting on these tankers and cargo ships watching missiles and drones explode over the surrounding waters. So this isn't an abstract diplomatic crisis for them. It's a daily survival situation, and that's a big part of why the administration is pitching today's operation as humanitarian.
How is Iran responding to the launch this morning?
Tehran is pushing back hard. Iranian state-run outlets, including the Fars news agency, dismissed the U.S. announcement as merely a claim and insisted that Iran maintains total control over the strait. Then by this afternoon, Iranian state media went further, and reported that the Iranian Navy prevented, in their words, American Zionist warships from entering the strait. They also claimed that 2 missiles struck a U.S. Navy frigate near Jask in the Gulf of Oman after it allegedly ignored warnings.
That's a serious claim. What are U.S. officials saying about it?
U.S. officials are flatly denying it. As reported by Axios and The Guardian, senior officials have dismissed the Iranian account as false and are suggesting it's part of a broader disinformation campaign tied to the launch of Project Freedom. So far, no independent confirmation of any strike on a U.S. frigate has emerged. The Pentagon's position is essentially that Tehran is trying to muddy the narrative on day 1 of the operation.
Have there been any verified incidents at sea today?
Yes, at least one. The British military's United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, known as UKMTO, reported that a tanker was struck by what it called an unknown projectile north of Fujairah shortly after the operation began. The crew was safe, thankfully, but officials are flagging this as at least the 2,000th such attack since the war started back in late February. So even with a partial ceasefire in place, the commercial shipping environment is still very dangerous.
You mentioned a ceasefire. Where do peace talks actually stand?
There's a fragile 3-week ceasefire holding right now, and the BBC reports that Pakistan has been hosting face-to-face talks and serving as a conduit for peace proposals between the parties. Iran has submitted a 14-point proposal that lays out its demands fairly clearly. It calls for the lifting of U.S. sanctions, the end of the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports, the withdrawal of U.S. forces from the region, and the cessation of all hostilities, including Israeli operations in Lebanon.
That's a lot to ask. How is President Trump responding to the proposal?
He's skeptical, to put it mildly. President Trump confirmed on Truth Social that he is reviewing the plan, but in comments to reporters and to Israel's Can News, he said, quote, "I can't imagine that it would be acceptable," end quote. He argued that Iran has, quote, "not yet paid a big enough price," end quote, for its actions over the last 47 years. So while talks are technically alive, the political space for a deal looks very narrow at the moment.
And remind us about that U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports. When did that start?
That blockade has been in place since April 13th, so just over 3 weeks ago. And according to PBS NewsHour, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says it's working as intended. He told reporters that the blockade is successfully depriving Tehran of oil revenue, and that Iranian oil storage facilities are rapidly filling up. Bessent predicted that Iran will be forced to start shutting in wells within the next week, which would be a major escalation of the economic pressure.
So if the blockade is squeezing Iran, how does today's humanitarian operation fit with that strategy?
That's exactly the tension a lot of analysts are pointing to. While the Trump administration maintains that Project Freedom is a humanitarian rescue, maritime experts interviewed by outlets like Splash 247 suggest the mission is really a strategic effort to break Iran's counter-blockade without officially ending the US's own economic pressure campaign. In other words, Washington wants to free up global commerce and keep oil flowing for everyone except Iran. Whether that distinction holds up in practice is going to be one of the big questions in the coming days.
Right, and the Strait of Hormuz isn't just any waterway. What's at stake globally if this drags on?
Roughly 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas typically passes through the Strait of Hormuz. So when ships sit at anchor for weeks, that ripples through energy markets, insurance premiums, and supply chains worldwide. That's why the U.S. is putting 15,000 troops and over 100 aircraft behind this. The economic stakes go well beyond the immediate war.
Last question, Ethan. As of this evening, has anyone actually made it out yet?
Not officially, no. As of the evening of May 4th, both UKMTO and CENTCOM have yet to confirm whether any of the 2,000 stranded vessels have successfully completed the full transit out of the Persian Gulf under this new U.S.-led framework. So we're really watching the first hours of a very ambitious operation, and the next 24 to 48 hours will tell us a lot about whether it's working.
Fascinating reporting, Ethan. Thanks so much for breaking it down for us this morning.
Always a pleasure, Grace.
A major showdown is unfolding in Santa Fe today between the state of New Mexico and Meta Platforms, Inc., the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Our tech and legal reporter Chloe is here to walk us through it. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. As of today, May 4th, the second phase of this landmark case is underway in a New Mexico courtroom. According to the Beaumont Enterprise and the Associated Press, state prosecutors are pushing for sweeping, fundamental changes to Meta's apps and algorithms. They're arguing the company's business model is, in their words, a public nuisance, and the central claim is that it's created a public health and safety crisis for children.
A public nuisance. That's a striking phrase. How did the case get to this second phase?
It's been a long road. Back in March of 2026, just about 2 months ago, a jury wrapped up Phase 1 with a major win for the state. As reported by the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, jurors found that Meta had knowingly harmed children's mental health and concealed internal knowledge about child sexual exploitation on its platforms. The jury ordered Meta to pay $375 million in civil penalties. That covered roughly 75,000 violations of New Mexico's Unfair Practices Act.
So the financial damage is already done. What's different about this current trial?
This phase is a bench trial, meaning a judge decides, not a jury. District Judge Brian Beachide is presiding, and it's expected to last about 3 weeks. The state isn't asking for more money this time. Instead, prosecutors want a permanent injunction that would force Meta to fundamentally restructure how its platforms work. Think of Phase 1 as the punishment and Phase 2 as the prescription for change.
And New Mexico's Attorney General has been pretty vocal about this, right?
Yes. Attorney General Raul Torres said the verdict, quote, punctured the aura of invincibility, end quote, that tech companies typically enjoy. He's referring to Section 230 of the U.S. Communications Decency Act, a 30-year-old provision that usually shields platforms from liability for content posted by users. New Mexico got around that by focusing on negligent design and product defects rather than on the content itself. Legal observers say that's opened a brand new path for holding big tech accountable.
Let's get into the demands. What exactly does the state want Judge Beachide to order?
It's a long and very specific list, Grace. According to KTVB.com and Fox Business, the state wants Meta to eliminate recommendation algorithms that prioritize, quote, constant engagement, end quote, for minors. They want to ban infinite scroll, autoplay, and aggressive push notifications on child accounts. They're also seeking a 90-hour monthly cap on the time kids spend on Meta platforms. That alone would be a massive shift in how these apps operate.
A 90-hour cap is significant. What about the question of who's actually using these apps?
That's a huge piece of it. The state wants a court-ordered 99% accuracy threshold for age verification, ensuring users are at least 13. Every child account would have to be linked to a verified parent or guardian. Public tallies for likes and sharing would be hidden for minors. And there'd be a court-supervised child safety monitor with, quote, unfettered access, end quote, to Meta's internal code and safety data.
That sounds like an extraordinary level of oversight. Anything else on the list?
One more that's drawing serious attention. Prosecutors want Meta to suspend default end-to-end encryption for minors. The argument is that encryption makes it harder to detect child sexual abuse material, often called CSAM. Supporters say it'll protect kids. Privacy advocates say it sets a dangerous precedent. We'll come back to that tension in a moment.
How is Meta responding to all of this?
Aggressively. Meta has vowed to appeal the initial jury verdict and is fighting hard against the proposed mandates. According to The Guardian and MRT.com, Meta's legal team is calling these demands, quote, technologically and practically infeasible, end quote. And in court filings, the company raised what some are calling the nuclear option. Meta said it might be forced to pull Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp out of New Mexico entirely rather than comply.
Pulling out of an entire state. That's quite a threat. Do they have other arguments?
They do. Meta argues it's being unfairly singled out among hundreds of apps that teenagers use. They also say the mandates infringe on First Amendment free speech protections and on parental rights. According to CBS News, Meta plans to call technical experts who will testify that building a state-specific version of their global infrastructure is, essentially, economically and engineeredly impossible. So they're framing this as both a legal and a logistical impossibility.
Let's talk about that public nuisance theory you mentioned earlier. How unusual is it to apply that here?
It's quite novel, Grace. Historically, public nuisance has been used for things like environmental hazards or the opioid crisis. Applying it to social media is uncharted territory. Eric Goldman, co-director of the High-Tech Law Institute at Santa Clara University School of Law, told the Associated Press that the theory doesn't naturally fit the internet. He said it may be venturing into, quote, uncertain legal waters, end quote. So even if New Mexico wins, expect the appeals to be intense.
And what about the underlying science? Is there agreement that social media is actually harming kids?
That's where things get more complicated than the headlines suggest. Reports from PBS and CBC highlight a real divide in the research community. On one side, you have researchers like Jonathan Haidt, who sees a direct link between algorithms and the youth mental health crisis. On the other side, skeptics like Dr. Amy Orban and Professor Andrew Przybylski of the Oxford Internet Institute push back hard. They argue the statistical link between social media use and lower well-being is, quote, microscopic, end quote.
How microscopic are we talking?
They say it explains as little as 0.4% of the variation in adolescent well-being. Their view is that the youth mental health crisis is more likely driven by broader societal stressors, things like academic pressure or economic instability. So when Meta's lawyers cross-examine the state's experts, expect this debate over causality to take center stage. It's not a settled question scientifically.
Now, you mentioned privacy concerns earlier. Who's raising those?
Digital rights groups, mainly. According to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, often called the EFF, and the ACLU, forcing platforms to collect government IDs or biometric scans creates high-value, quote, honeypots, end quote, for hackers. They argue these mandates are a, quote, net negative, end quote, for child safety. The concern is that you destroy online anonymity and create lifelong security vulnerabilities, especially with biometric data, which you obviously can't change like a password.
So the very tools meant to protect kids could end up exposing them. That's a tough trade-off. Zooming out, why does this New Mexico case matter beyond New Mexico?
Because it's the first one to reach trial, Grace. More than 40 state attorneys general have filed similar lawsuits, and the legal world is watching this courtroom closely. There's also a massive federal multi-state lawsuit involving 33 states scheduled for trial on August 5, 2026, in California. That's just about 3 months from today.
So today's trial could shape that one too?
Very much so. According to ABC News and NPR, the outcome here will likely serve as a, quote, bellwether, end quote, for those federal proceedings. If New Mexico wins meaningful structural changes, it could force a nationwide overhaul of how social media platforms are designed and regulated. If Meta wins, it'll reinforce the protections big tech has long relied on. Either way, the precedent matters enormously.
When can we expect a ruling from Judge Beachide?
The bench trial is expected to run about 3 weeks, so a ruling could come in late May. In the meantime, Meta's services remain active across New Mexico. Parents, kids, and the tech industry are all in a holding pattern, and whatever the judge decides, you can bet appeals will follow almost immediately. This story is far from over.
Fascinating and consequential reporting, Chloe. Thank you so much for breaking it all down for us this morning.
Always a pleasure, Grace. We'll keep tracking it.
Here are some other headlines. The Israeli military is redrawing the map of the Gaza Strip, asserting control over approximately 2/3 of the territory and pushing well beyond the boundaries established in the October 2025 ceasefire. This significant expansion includes a restricted area covering an additional 11% of the enclave past the previously agreed-upon yellow line. According to Army Radio, the military presence now blankets 59% of the region, sparking global concerns that a temporary stay might be turning into a permanent occupation. As the diplomatic landscape shifts, the Board of Peace, led by Nikolay Mladenov, is finding it difficult to find common ground after Hamas rejected a disarmament proposal in Cairo. Meanwhile, the United States State Department is closing its flagship civil-military coordination mission as the regional peace plan stalls. Defense Minister Israel Katz and Secretary of State Marco Rubio are navigating these choppy waters while the United States launches Project Freedom to escort neutral vessels through the Strait of Hormuz during an ongoing confrontation with Iran, prioritizing military superiority over previous truce terms. In medical news, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani is currently in critical but stable condition at a Florida hospital. The 81-year-old was reportedly sounding a bit hoarse and under the weather during his online show before being admitted on Sunday. While his spokesperson says the former mayor is a fighter, this health crisis follows a fractured vertebra from a 2025 car accident and a mountain of legal battles involving a $148 million defamation judgment. President Trump has taken to social media to call his ally a true warrior, but for now, America's mayor is facing his toughest trial yet. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers are hoping to take a bite out of claim sharks who prey on those who served. Representatives Chris Pappas and Don Bacon have introduced the Veterans Benefits Information Protection Act to stop unaccredited consultants from fishing for profits by charging thousands of dollars for benefits assistance that should be free. These predatory firms use automated call bots to harvest private data from hotlines, sometimes triggering unauthorized bills for $20,000. Secretary of Veterans Affairs Doug Collins is joining the VFW and the American Legion in this effort to close a 20-year-old loophole and clean up a $73 billion a year industry. In Morocco, the lion's share of search resources is being directed toward the southwestern coast after 2 United States Army soldiers went missing during a recreational hike. The service members were participating in the African Lion 2026 exercise when they fell from the sea cliffs near Cap Draa. Portions of the 30-nation exercise have been halted as helicopters and naval frigates scour the Atlantic waters. Officials say no foul play is suspected, but the rocky terrain has made for a difficult cliffhanger as the exercise nears its May 8 conclusion. Finally, Kenya is struggling to stay afloat as record-breaking floods have claimed at least 18 more lives this week, bringing the total death toll since March to over 100. The eastern region has been hit hardest, with landslides burying hopes in counties like Tharaka Nithi and Kiambu. Interior Cabinet Secretary Kipchumba Murkomen is urging residents to stream away from high-risk areas as the Seven Forks Dam system reaches its capacity. With 17 major roads cut off and 54,000 households affected, the country is facing a humanitarian crisis that has truly reached a high water mark. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.